I think it does mean, this issue that around how do we evolve ourselves, and the comment that Ingrid made about being the change ourselves. I think it means that we as an organization also have to look at who we are. I mean, my only disappointment in a way is I look out and see the group that is gathered here, which is a group of care leadership, is that our care leadership doesn't reflect who we are as an organization. And when we talk about the fact that 95+% of our staff are people from the countries in which we work, but our leadership isn't. And I think we still have a ways to go in terms of making sure that we increasingly become who we want to be, the face that we want to be, bring the voices in, and really make sure that in our organizational evolution, that we're looking at that in all sorts of ways. And I think that's just one example of being the change ourselves. And we've talked about issues of gender. We've talked about issues of corruption, governance, et cetera. Some of those same things are issues that we have to tackle ourselves. So I think who we become as an organization allows us to become differently as a global body. It also, has implications, as Ingrid and several others said, about who we are and examining for ourselves who we are individually and how that makes us change and grow as people. And I guess, thirdly, is this issue of how do we tackle what I think is something that we continue to dance around, which is who are we as CARE International? And if we really want to see ourselves as a family, break down silos, think about working in a more integrated way, look at how we affect our work at the country levels, I think we have to think about what the implications are for how we interact as a body of currently of 12 members, and what does that actually mean, and stop dancing around it and be willing to make some hard decisions about what that really means. That's on you, Robert, but no, it's on all of us. But I think it is something that we have got to tackle and grapple with. I'll be happy for the day that my card doesn't read, President and CEO of CARE USA, but the U.S. President of CARE International. I think that flipping that switch and thinking very differently about who we are and what our identity is, and that CARE International is us, it isn't somebody outside of us, and then I'm CARE USA. So, I just think we should think about some of those things.
I'll just add a couple of things to that, because I think Helene covered a lot of the ground in that very good response. One is that I think, looking forward, we're going to have a different reference point. Well, accountability applies in a whole variety of different ways. We're accountable up, down, sideways, to our colleagues, to donors, to people that we're working with in poor countries, developing countries. But I think the weighting, the emphasis we give to accountability to people living in poverty has to be greater, and it has to be reflected in our structure, in the way we organize, in the agenda setting for the organization. It doesn't mean we won't be doing other things. We have to do other things that are sort of financial issues and fundraising issues and branding issues. But unless we can, well, I won't put it that way, we will be, in the future, incorporating that into our fundamental agenda for action at the most senior levels. And our effectiveness within CARE and our ability to engage with the movement outside of CARE will depend fundamentally on our ability to do that well. I think the second thing linked to that is that, Helene mentioned punching at our weight, above our weight. Well, yeah, we're currently punching well below our weight. We're not getting nearly the benefits we should be getting from being part of a confederation, and it's sort of the same point Helene was making about the name, the President of CARE President USA of CARE International. But, and there are, I think, in future, we'll be much more coherent in that respect. We will be using the benefits of our scale together for our investments, identifying efficiencies, exchanging ideas, and there'll be a whole variety of ways we'll be doing that. I think at the same time, we'll be doing that with other international NGOs. There are a whole variety of ways we should be working together as international NGOs, and we're not. we each purchase travel, we each purchase automobiles, we do a lot of purchasing of travel. There are all sorts of economies of scale that if we were really putting the interests of people living in poverty at the front, we would be finding many more resources to direct to those places. So I think it's a more joined up care, and it's not only that, that's connected to movements, poverty movements, nationally, regionally, globally.
Thanks, Robert. And as you both begin to paint a picture of what that future might look like, I'm going to invite you, if you'd like to, just to make a couple of concluding remarks, and really, in that context, talk about what your role and how you see your role in helping create that picture, and what's the difference that you're going to bring. As you like.
Okay, thank you. Right. I think it's a big question, and there's a lot to synthesize. Okay, let me start. Let me give you my view of the situation today as I see it. You know, there are some in this audience who have been poor and have lived in poverty. They've experienced it firsthand. There are others of us who work with people living in poverty all the time on a day-to-day basis. There are others, for example, in country offices or regional management units or elsewhere who interact and connect with people living in poverty regularly. And of course, as you go further away from poverty in less developed countries, the people in care in this room, you know, there are some that think about poverty, that study it and analyze it and occasionally visit projects. There are others that are donors perhaps that maybe visit or maybe don't, and they see poverty from the comfort of an air-conditioned room in relative luxury. And I think what's happened over time in CARE, because CARE is a very old organization, is that systems have evolved to provide what is essentially a transfer of funds from the north to the south. And this system has grown and expanded, a bit like in North America there's an aspen tree that actually, it's a bit like mangrove, I suppose. It sends up roots. One tree might start, and there's actually a root that comes up that forms another tree, but they're actually all connected. It's all one, essentially one living organism, even though it looks like a number of trees. And CARE has sort of expanded in that way. We have new members that were set up. There were different structures and departments. But essentially, the coherence in that structure existed in only a few places because it was only the coherence necessary for channeling the funds from the north to the south. The coherence existed fundamentally, eventually, at the country office with one country office. That's where it all came together to make it work. We had a CI code and a brand, which was also a bit of coherence, but it was really maximum flexibility to enable, you know, everything that was possible to happen to enable the funds to flow north-south. Now what we're seeing is that that's not good enough anymore. That our whole understanding of poverty is now leading to a change, a requirement to change that model. And we find that that coherence that only exists at country office needs to, country offices, such as it is, there are problems at country office level, of course, needs to exist elsewhere in our confederation. And a good example is a focus on rights and rights-based approaches, because if you focus on that as a fundamental cause of poverty, how can you not be doing global advocacy coherently?